With 10 seconds left in overtime, Indiana was finally in control. The Fever had erased an 18-point deficit, survived 3 Atlanta chances to win at the end of regulation, and built a 5-point lead. Then, Caitlin Clark barely made contact with Rhyne Howard on a 3-point attempt. The whistle blew, and suddenly a game Indiana had fought all night to rescue was back in danger. Clark immediately wanted a challenge. The replay came up. Even the ESPN broadcast expected the call to disappear. It did not. The foul stood. That one decision became the perfect ending to a game that had already produced a much larger officiating debate. The viral clips make the argument look simple. Angel Reese is physical with Clark. Clark absorbs contact, whistles stay silent, and then Clark gets called when she responds. Sophie Cunningham gets knocked to the floor during another physical battle, and again viewers see no whistle. Then Clark gets tagged for light contact on Howard in the biggest possession of overtime. Put those clips together, and it is easy to understand why fans came away asking whether Clark was getting a different whistle. But the real story is more interesting than simply saying the referees were targeting her, because there were calls that went Indiana's way. The official play-by-play shows Reese was called for a personal foul that Clark drew in the first quarter. Reese was also whistled for an offensive foul involving Cunningham earlier in the game. Atlanta was not playing under a completely different rule book where nothing was ever called. What made this game frustrating was not the absence of every whistle, it was the feeling that the line kept moving. That difference matters. Indiana entered Atlanta in a major playoff positioning game. The Fever were holding 4th place, while the Dream were close behind and trying to move into a home court position of their own. Atlanta led by 8 entering the 4th quarter and had controlled long stretches of the night. This was not a relaxed regular season game in the middle of June. Every possession carried the kind of weight teams normally feel in the postseason, and physicality came with it. Reese and Clark spent multiple possessions battling around screens, rebounds, and off-ball positioning. On one of the clips that spread online, Reese's arm comes across Clark high while they are fighting for space. Another sequence shows more contact as Clark tries to move through the action. At full speed, officials have to decide whether they are seeing normal competitive contact, a hold, a push, or something that creates an unfair advantage. Fans watching slow-motion replays do not have that problem. They get to freeze the frame. They get to rewind. They get to compare one play with the next. That is where the anger starts. If contact around Clark's upper body is judged as incidental on one possession, then viewers naturally expect a similar standard when Clark is defending on the other end. If a forearm, bump, or hand on the body is being allowed for Atlanta, the Fever expect to understand how much they are allowed to use. 2. Instead, one of the moments that went viral showed Clark being called for a shooting foul on Reese in the 3rd quarter. The official play-by-play confirms Reese drew that foul and went to the line. That call by itself does not prove anything, but when viewers have just watched several clips where Clark appears to absorb contact without a whistle, the next whistle against her feels different. That is how officiating loses trust, not necessarily through one terrible decision, but through comparisons. And the biggest comparison of the night came in overtime. Indiana had somehow turned the game around. Atlanta led 72-64 entering the 4th. Then the Fever tightened defensively, held the Dream to 9 points in the final period of regulation, and forced overtime. Makayla Timpson gave Indiana a huge lift. Aaliyah Boston was everywhere defensively. Kelsey Mitchell kept her historic scoring streak alive. Clark was creating offense even when the game became chaotic. By the final minute of overtime, Indiana had a 91-88 lead. Rhyne Howard completed a 3-point play to keep Atlanta alive. Kelsey Mitchell answered with a driving layup, making it 93-88 with 13.6 seconds remaining. At that point, the Dream needed something dramatic. Howard launched from 3. Clark reached from behind. The whistle came. The official play-by-play records it as a shooting foul on Clark with 10.4 seconds remaining. Indiana challenged the call. The ruling was upheld. And this is where the controversy moved beyond normal fan frustration, because the national broadcast crew was also surprised. Ryan Ruocco said he saw only a little contact. Rebecca Lobo went even further, describing it as less than normal contact and saying she would be surprised if the call was not overturned. The replay showed Clark's fingertips making contact near Howard's back as Howard rose into the shot. The officials still kept the foul. Howard made all 3 free throws. A 5-point Indiana lead became 2. Now think about the stakes. If Clark misses at the other end, Atlanta gets another chance. If Indiana turns the ball over, the entire comeback can disappear. If Howard or Alicia Gray gets one more clean look, the game could flip because of a call the broadcasters themselves did not expect to survive review. That is why the moment hit so hard. It was not a random second-quarter whistle. It was a 3-shot foul with the game almost over. And the review did not calm the controversy. It made it bigger. Usually a challenge gives everyone a reset. The officials get multiple angles, the crowd waits, the players step away. The broadcast explains what is being reviewed. If the call remains, viewers at least expect to understand why. Here, the broadcast reaction went the opposite direction. The more they watched it, the less convinced they became. That is never good for confidence in the whistle. But Clark still had to finish the game. Atlanta fouled her on the next possession. She went to the line with 9.8 seconds left and made both free throws. No argument, no missed opportunity. 2 points. Indiana led 95-91. The Dream missed one final three. Clark grabbed the rebound, and the Fever escaped Atlanta with their 4th straight win. That ending is important because it changes the tone of the story. This is not a video about Clark blaming officials for a loss. Indiana won. Clark scored 26 points and added 9 assists. Boston finished with 18 points, 14 rebounds, 5 steals and 3 blocks. Timpson scored a career-high 20. Mitchell also reached 20, extending her streak of 20-point games. The Fever did enough to survive the physicality, the missed opportunities, and the controversial late call. And that makes the officiating conversation easier to evaluate, because there is no need to invent an excuse for the result. The question becomes much cleaner. Was the contact being judged consistently? That same question comes up in the Sophie Cunningham clip. During a fight for position, Reese extends into Cunningham, and Cunningham ends up going out of bounds. A slow-motion replay spread after the game because the contact happened directly in front of an official and no foul was called on that particular sequence. Again, slow motion can make every physical play look worse. Rebounding position is messy. Players use hips, arms, and leverage constantly. Officials are not supposed to call every piece of contact, but the problem is comparison. If that level of force is allowed there, then why did Clark's light touch on Howard become 3 free throws in overtime? That is the question fans kept returning to, and it is a much stronger argument than claiming the entire game was fixed against Indiana. In fact, the official play-by-play itself shows why a conspiracy claim does not hold up cleanly. Reese was called for multiple fouls. Clark drew fouls. Cunningham drew fouls. Atlanta was penalized on several physical possessions. So saying the referees simply refused to call anything on the Dream would be inaccurate. What the footage does support is a debate about the threshold. What is enough contact for a whistle? Does that threshold change depending on whether the play is on the ball or off the ball? Does the same standard apply in the first quarter and the final 10 seconds of overtime? And if the officials are going to allow a physical game for 44 minutes and 50 seconds, should they suddenly decide that fingertips on a shooter's back are enough for 3 free throws at the end? That last question is exactly why Lobo's reaction mattered. Her point was not that there was literally zero contact, there was contact. The argument was that this type of touch had not been treated as a foul throughout a game full of much heavier contact. That is what consistency means. It does not mean calling everything. It means players should understand the line. Clark is one of the hardest players in the WNBA to officiate because defenses are constantly testing that line against her. She moves without the ball. She changes speed. She creates separation. She uses screens. She attacks from well beyond the three-point line. She forces defenders to chase, grab space, recover, and make decisions at angles they do not see against most guards. If officials call every bit of contact, the game can become a parade to the free throw line. If they allow too much, defenders learn they can disrupt her movement with hands and body contact before the ball even arrives. The correct answer is not special protection. It is predictable enforcement. And the same applies to Reese. She is one of the most physical rebounders in the league. Her game is built around contact, leverage, second efforts, and winning space near the basket. Some of those battles are going to look violent in slow motion while still being legal basketball. The officials have to decide where physicality ends and displacement begins. That is difficult, but if the standard is unclear, every Clark-Reese matchup becomes an officiating argument before the final buzzer even sounds. And there is another reason the Atlanta game mattered so much. It became the most watched WNBA game ever on cable, averaging 2.6 million viewers on ESPN and peaking at 4 million. That means every questionable whistle was being judged by an enormous audience in real time. The league is no longer operating in an environment where a controversial call disappears after the local broadcast ends. One replay can become millions of views. One missed call can become a league-wide discussion. One upheld challenge can become the story of the night. That level of attention creates pressure on referees, but it also creates an opportunity for the WNBA to be clearer. Pool reports, rule explanations, and transparent review standards matter more now because fans are studying every frame, and the league does not need to agree with fans on every call. It just needs to make the standard understandable, because the most frustrating part of the Atlanta game was not that Caitlin Clark was called for fouls. Players get fouled. Players commit fouls. Stars do not deserve a different rulebook. The frustrating part was seeing heavier contact survive without a whistle, then watching a much lighter piece of contact become 3 free throws in the most important seconds of the game. That is why the targeted headline catches attention. It matches the emotion of the clips, but the evidence gives us a more responsible conclusion. We cannot prove the referees were targeting Caitlin Clark. We can say the game produced several moments that made the whistle look inconsistent. We can say the late foul on Rhyne Howard was controversial enough that both ESPN announcers expected it to be overturned. We can say the ruling was upheld anyway. We can say another uncalled physical play involving Reese and Sophie Cunningham added fuel to the argument. And we can say Clark still answered the controversy in the best possible way. She made the free throws. Indiana got the stop. The Fever won the game. That may be the biggest difference between this version of Clark and the one from earlier in her career. The frustration was visible, but it did not become the final story. The final story was execution. So the next time a game gets this physical, that is what everyone should watch. Not whether Caitlin Clark gets every whistle. Not whether Reese is allowed to play aggressively. Not whether one fan base can find the perfect slow-motion frame. Watch the standard. If one level of contact is legal for Atlanta, is it legal for Indiana? If a touch is enough for 3 free throws in overtime, was the same touch being called all night? And if the answer keeps changing from possession to possession, then the WNBA has a consistency problem whether the player involved is Caitlin Clark, Reese, Rhyne Howard, or anybody else. Indiana survived this one, but if the same kind of whistle happens in a playoff elimination game, there may not be another possession to fix it. So what do you think? Was the late call on Clark simply the correct technical application of the rule? Or did the officials change the contact standard at the worst possible moment?